This video will show you how to replace the front steering knuckle on a forward edge. This is part of the front steering and suspension located behind the front wheel. Let's get into it. A quick note about this repair: when it's done, you're going to need a four-wheel alignment. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front end of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've completed that, we're going to start removing the wheel. If you have a center cover, go ahead and remove that first. Typically, you're going to find a small slot that you could carefully pry in. For this, I'm just using a small pry bar. Once you've removed that, you're going to remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts, and then we can remove that wheel. We're moving to the outer tie rod end mounting hardware next. Typically, you're going to find a cotter pin of some sort. Go ahead and remove that. We'll set that aside for disposal. Continuing on, we're going to remove our mounting nut. We're using an 18mm for our tie rod mounting nut. Now that I have this broken free, I'm leaving it on the stud, just a couple threads here. We'll start separating the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. Now to separate this, if you do not have a tie rod end separator tool, you could carefully use a hammer. A quick note about this: be extremely careful around your ABS sensor and wire, and you also want to be careful not to cause any damage. We're tapping directly on the knuckle here. You could also carefully tap along the top of the mounting nut in this area. Now we can move up from in that same area. We're going to start dislodging our ABS wheel speed sensor. Now on my application, my mounting bolt is fairly rusted. This would typically be an 8mm. Now typically the bolt will just come out of there. Of course you would want to give it a close inspection and set it aside. My bolt did break off in here, but that's okay because I intend on replacing the steering knuckle. I'm not even going to worry about removing the rest of the bolt. Let's just continue on with the sensor itself, but we do want to be extremely careful not to break that in the steering knuckle. Now we want to use some penetrant here. I'm going to use a flat blade screwdriver since it's fairly thin, and I'm going to try to make my way in between the sensor and the knuckle and gently pry. Now that I have the sensor out of there, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, give it a thorough inspection, and set it aside so it does not get damaged. Doesn't look like it's cracked. This looks good. On the outboard side of where the brake rotor is, we're going to make sure we use a spacer and one of our original lug nuts to help prevent the rotor from moving on us while we continue on here. We'll use a 36mm for our axle nut. We'll use some penetrant where the axle and the wheel bearing hub meet. We'll continue on with a hammer and punch. The punch is going to go directly in the center of our front axle, and we're going to tap on this, breaking the axle free from the wheel bearing hub. Once you've broken that free, we can start removing the caliper from the area. To remove the caliper, we want to have a look along the backside. You're going to find that you have 2 19mm headed mounting bolts to remove. Now, a quick note about this is once we do have them removed, we're going to be setting the caliper aside. We don't want to put any pressure on the flex hose, so you want to make sure you have something available to be able to hang this. We'll start with the upper mounting bolt. Fully remove it, give it a quick inspection, and then I always like to start it back in a couple threads. Next mounting bolt. Now, as I start pulling this away from our brake rotor, the next thing I always like to do is have a quick look at my brake pads inside of the caliper bracket. If it looks like they're damaged, worn low, or at an angle, it's a good idea to replace them. These look fine, so I'm going to set them aside, and as I mentioned, I want to make sure I hang this so it's putting no pressure on my flex hose. Let's remove our brake rotor next. To remove the brake rotor, I'm holding onto it, I'm removing my lug nut and my spacer, and we can slide this out of place. Up along the top of the steering knuckle, where it connects to our front strut, we're going to start removing the hardware. Now, as far as this hardware is concerned, we have a 24mm mounting nut along the rearward side. The bolt comes through from the front. Looking at the front bolts, you can tell that they do have this small ear. Now, on these, I typically still like to hold the bolt heads using a 21mm wrench. We should have movement here. We'll leave this mounting bolt in place. Both of those move fairly well. Let's make our way down towards the ball joint. As we make our way down to this point, you're going to find that you have a 16mm headed pinch bolt that comes through from the front, all the way through the knuckle, through the ball joint, and towards the other side. On the opposite side, you have a 15mm mounting nut. I'm going to hold the mounting nut using my wrench, and I'll just continue on by turning that bolt counterclockwise. For good measure, we'll use some penetrant in this area. We'll turn this so we can have a close look. If you were looking along the center inboard area of the steering knuckle, you can see that there's two ears that were squeezed together onto the ball joint stud using that pinch bolt. We have penetrant in this area. Now we can continue on with a hammer and a chisel in between these two ears. We want to try to gently separate these. We do not want to cause any damage to that ball joint. Now that I have the chisel in this area, and I'm separating the ears, the penetrant should make its way in between the ears and the ball joint, and I'm going to start tapping on my control arm. I want to try bringing the control arm down, separating the ball joint from the steering knuckle. Now, once it breaks free, we're going to pause here. We'll make our way back up to the top so we can remove the hardware, and we'll continue on sliding this out of place. Now, the next step, we're going to have to do a series of things. We're going to hold onto the knuckle and remove the upper hardware. As we remove that, we'll start pivoting the knuckle outward, and we're removing the axle from inside of the wheel bearing. As that's happening, we're coming out diagonally and removing the ball joint from the steering knuckle. Keep in mind, the steering knuckle can be fairly heavy. Both of these mounting bolts should look the same. Go ahead and clean those down. Quick inspection, set them aside. There it is, friend. Now, prior to installing any brand new part, let's make sure we clean and inspect the mounting areas. We'll start up along the top, looking at the bottom of the front strut. This is where the knuckle slides into. We're just going to clean this up. We're using a wire brush. We just want to make sure it's not rotted and weak. Once you've done that, let's focus on the end of the axle, the area that slides into our wheel bearing hub. Now, looking at this, we can see that we have a splined area and we also have a threaded portion. We'll clean this up. Once again, I'm using a wire brush for this. We can also use some parts cleaner if necessary. While we're paying attention to the axle, we're going to coat the splined area with some anti-seize. When we're doing this, we do not necessarily need to get any on the threaded portion of the axle. We're moving down towards our lower ball joint. We need to clean the stud and inspect the seal. Doesn't seem like it's torn. That looks good. For good measure, just a little bit of anti-season along that stud. Now let's prepare to install our brand new steering knuckle assembly. As we bring this into position, we're going to make sure the lower ball joint aligns with its lower mounting point. The axle will slide through here, and then after that, we're aligning up along the top with our front strut, and we'll start in the 2 mounting bolts from the front towards the rear. Now it may not be lined up, you just want to carefully twist as necessary. Let's continue on bringing this up into the proper positioning. At this point, you're going to have to adjust the height of your knuckle. You can either bring it up or down as necessary. We have our mounting bolts. We have both pieces of upper hardware in position. Let's make our way down to the ball joint pinch bolt. I've cleaned the threads, applied some anti-seize to the smooth area. We can continue on aligning this and pressing it all the way through. Let's make our way towards the rearward side for the rest of the hardware. We have our hardware. After they're both started on, snug them up and then torque them to 166 foot-pounds. Those are torqued. We're making our way all the way down to the lower pinch bolt. This pinch bolt, as you know, goes through the knuckle, past the ball joint stud, through the other side of the knuckle. On the rearward side, we have our 15 millimeter mounting nut. Go ahead and start that on. With that started on, we're going to snug this up, and the torque for this is going to be 41 foot-pounds. At this point, we're going to continue on with our axle nut directly in the center. When you go to install the axle nut, we want to make sure that we have all the weight off of the suspension, so it's hanging. There can be no pressure on the wheel bearing that can cause damage. Now with that said, let's make sure that we install the axle nut by hand. We are not using an impact tool to install this nut. When you go to tighten this, you may find that this wants to spin on you. Now if that is the case, you're going to carefully use a pry bar diagonally down past your lug studs, down towards the ground, which will prevent this from turning. At that point, we'll continue on with a hand tool. We're going to bottom this out and then torque it to 258 foot-pounds. Now we're going to focus directly on our wheel bearing hub mating surface. We're going to use some anti-seize. When applying the anti-seize, go directly along the center area that we can see here, and then you can also see that we have another raised area going along the outboard side. Just a thin layer should do. Now when we go to install our front brake rotor, we're looking at the inboard side. The main area that we need to focus is along where the wheel bearing hub would sit. You want to make sure you clean this up so there's no raised areas, in which case you may find you have a brake pulsation. After cleaning that, let's get the brake rotor in place. While holding that against the wheel hub mating surface, continue on with a spacer and one of your lug nuts. Let's continue on with reinstalling the caliper next. Now it's time to start installing the front caliper. When we bring this into position, we need to make sure the brake pads go over the brake rotor, but we also want to make sure that the flex hose has not been twisted in a way that's going to restrict brake fluid flow. As I bring this around like this, you can see that this will cause an issue. This will not. Flex hose looks good. We'll continue on with our 2 mounting bolts. As far as those bolts, go ahead and start them in, bottom them out, and then torque each of them to 98 foot-pounds. Double check to make sure the caliper bracket is properly secured. This should not move around in any way. Along the outboard side, we can remove our lug nut and our spacer. Now the sensor is going to go directly into this port. We're going to align our mounting bolt port after that and install the mounting bolt. We have some anti-seize on our mounting bolt. We'll start that in by hand, bottom it out, and torque that to 62 inch-pounds. Okay, right there's bottomed out. Double check to make sure that's secured in place. Now along the back side of the knuckle, we're going to attach our outer tie rod end to the knuckle. We'll carefully pivot things as necessary so we can align them. Start on our mounting nut. On this application, we do have a castle nut, which means it has slots. If you were looking at the tie rod stud, you're going to find a port leading through it. Go ahead and snug this up. Torque it to 35 foot-pounds, and then we'll make sure we can install our locking cotter pin. Now when we look at this, we're attempting to make sure we have our slot aligned with the port on the tie rod end. If it's not aligned, continue tightening until the very next slot is, and then install that locking cotter pin. Now since mine is not fully aligned, I'm just going to continue tightening as I mentioned. One last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall our front wheel. Once you have all 5 lug nuts on there, we're going to bottom them out in a crisscross manner. We'll get the wheel safely on the ground and then torque each of the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Now I have the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque these to that 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. If you have a center cover, install that now. When we install the center cover, we'll make sure that our lug nuts align with the corresponding ports here. Press it in, double check to make sure it's secured all the way around. Okay friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you want to do is make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's firm. After that, take your vehicle for a road test, you're listening for any odd noises, and then get yourself an alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.